Coming up on Clearcut Plus, Iran seizes a British oil tanker in the Strait of Hormuz. It then briefly detains another before letting it go. Yet, as tensions rise in the Gulf, Iran says it is ready to talk. The latest outbreak of the Ebola virus in the African Congo is threatening to spiral out of control, prompting the World Health Organization to sound its loudest alarm as it proclaims the situation an international emergency. And in Yemen, there are lots of obstacles to delivering humanitarian aid. The most deadly are the thousands of landmines. We'll tell you about a U.S.-led effort to uncover and disarm those mines.
From the i24NEWS studio in Times Square in New York, this is Clearcut Plus with Michelle McCory.
Welcome, everyone, and thank you for watching. I'm Michelle Devone, in tonight for Michelle McCory. Iran ratchets up tensions in the Persian Gulf, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard seizing a British oil tanker and briefly detaining another. Iran also mocking the U.S. claims that one of their drones had been taken down by the United States, saying Iran has lost no drones. Correspondent Megan Tevrizian reports.
Tensions rising with Iran. The UK confirms 2 ships, 1 British tanker and another Liberian-flagged vessel, were seized by Iran.
And this only goes to show what I'm saying about Iran. Trouble, nothing but trouble.
This follows a downing of an Iranian drone that was flying too close to an American Navy ship in the Gulf.
No doubt about it. No, we shot it down.
According to the president and other American officials, the drone was flying just over a half-mile from the USS Boxer, an amphibious assault ship transiting in the Strait of Hormuz, a vital oil passageway. But despite the president's declaration, the drone was not shot down. Marines brought it down with counter-drone jamming equipment.
John, tell me, please. John Bolton, you're there?
Yeah, there's no question that this was an Iranian drone, and the USS Boxer took it out and announced yesterday because it posed a threat to the ship and its crew. It was entirely the right thing to do.
Iran, however, continues to deny the president's claim. Iran state television today aired footage it said disproved the Navy destroyed an Iranian drone, although the edited clips do not show the entirety of the drone's flight.
This footage is to show that the drone returned to its base safe and sound.
It was less than a month ago that Iran shot down a far more sophisticated and expensive U.S. drone Iran claims violated its airspace.
We hope for their sake they don't do anything foolish. If they do, they will pay a price like nobody's ever paid a price.
All right, and that was Megan Tevrizian reporting. What comes next is the question on everyone's minds. President Trump said he will speak with the UK about the seizure, adding that the United States doesn't have many tankers in the region, as he stressed the long and good relationship with Britain. And we should add these latest developments come as Iran has made overtures that it is ready to talk. Joining me now to give us her insight is Emily Hawthorne. She is a Middle East and North Africa analyst for Stratfor, a geopolitical intelligence company. Emily, what's your take on Iran's willingness to talk? Do you see it as a sincere one?
I think what Iran offered this week, which was enhanced investigations into its nuclear program, is something that is a bit of an empty offer. It's something that Iran has offered before, but they want full sanctions relief. So really, I think the United States and Iran are still speaking on totally different planes in terms of what they'd be willing to accept from each other. And I think that Iran seizing a British ship is really part of trying to deter the United States and its allies from piling on sanctions to Iran. It's saying that those sanctions aren't working, and we still have dominion over this Persian Gulf theater. So I think, they're trying to keep sanctions from being piled on, and they're trying to communicate that they have naval assets that they can use to try and patrol this theater, which they view as really completely their own.
Deterrence seems to definitely be key in this game. What do you think is being said, however, behind closed doors? Because it's hard to believe that someone would want this situation to escalate even further.
I think, of course, both the United States and Iran, for their own economic and national security, neither side wants this to escalate to a military conflict. But Iran is certainly pushing it in that direction. And at some point, it's likely that the United States responds. There's simply so many triggers. The drone incident that your correspondent mentioned is just one of several different triggers that we could see the United States deciding, in order to establish more firm deterrence from the United States side, we need to strike some Iranian assets in order to send a clear message. So I think, what is the most likely response to the seizure of the British tankers? I mean, we might see more sanctions. We might see more efforts to pull together the patrol program that's called Sentinel that different countries are talking about. But ultimately, both sides are going to have to negotiate eventually over something broader. And so both sides are sort of positioning what they're willing to negotiate and what they're not.
Again, as you mentioned, it's all about deterrence. Do you think Iran's reaction was disproportionate to what happened to its own tanker 1 week ago?
I think it is very bold. I think we're seeing Iran acting in a very bold way that shows that they, on the one hand, they do want to negotiate from a very maximalist position. They want to engage in, they're showing that they are willing to defend their space, and they're really trying to test a line with the United States to see at what point the United States responds. Of course, this seizure of this tanker, these are British tankers, so it really right now comes down to, with this specific incident, how the UK is going to respond. But we don't think that the UK is going to respond unless it has some United States backing as well. And that's why you have to look at all of the actions that are happening in the Persian Gulf theater and also throughout the broader Middle East in places like Iraq and Yemen, because the United States is perceiving Iranian activity across the whole region in how it's deciding how to react.
And everyone is surely watching. Emily Hawthorne, thank you so much for your insight. We're staying in the Middle East for our next story. Each Friday, Israeli security forces brace for riots along the Gaza border. Israelis who live in southern Israel near the border can see the protests happening less than a mile away from their homes. And some of those residents have decided to push the violence aside and try a different route. i24NEWS defense correspondent Daniel Tzemach joined them along the Israel-Gaza border to get a sense of what they are trying to accomplish.
Just a few hundred yards away from where weekly violent demonstrations have happened each Friday for over a year now, another sort of demonstration is happening outside of Kibbutz Be'eri on the Israeli side of the Israel-Gaza border. A group of people from different walks of life, both Arabs and Jews, Israelis, Americans, are all gathering here and really conducting a dialogue between one another, all coming from, as I said, different walks of life, but with one common goal.
This place has been gathering people, Arabs and Jews and Muslims, and right next to the border with Gaza, to open up people's sense of consciousness. What is it like to be here, and what is it like for the people there? And what I've learned in all these meetings is the depth of humanity.
To show the whole world also there are good people on the two sides. To see the Israelis are working with Palestinians on the other side in order to find solution in this war zone. It's a very difficult situation, it's a very difficult reality, but people still believe in peace.
Like today, we have enough water for everyone. We have enough land. We have enough possibility. And we can create our future as a dream, but it's not a dream that never ever be here. It's a dream that yesterday, I remember it.
Maybe a small group of people that are gathered here today and each Friday for the past 15 months, but they've managed to achieve a great deal. Some Gazans from within the Palestinian enclave enter Israel to attend Israeli hospitals, but they've also been granted permission at times to join this group. But some Palestinians have also been punished for this initiative, even arrested. But still, each person that's gathered here each Friday and the group may change, still feel that the dream that they have is really at an arm's reach. Daniel Tzemach, i24NEWS, Be'eri.
Definitely gives hope. Coming up on Clearcut Plus, the World Health Organization is sounding the alarm warning that the current Ebola outbreak in Africa is the second worst in history. And while the Apollo 11 moon mission was historic, we'll make the mission personal and talk about a life-changing moment for one 6-year-old. You're watching Clearcut Plus. Welcome back. I'm Michelle DeVone in tonight for Michelle McCory. The World Health Organization is sounding a loud and urgent alarm. The group has declared the outbreak in Africa's Democratic Republic of the Congo to be a public health emergency of international concern. It is a label rarely used by the group, but this latest outbreak of Ebola and the virus is the second largest outbreak in history. Senior International Affairs correspondent Owen Alterman has more.
The latest pictures from the Ebola crisis in Central Africa. In Goma, in the DR Congo, jabs of the Ebola vaccine, trying to contain what the World Health Organization has now declared a global health emergency.
As soon as we found out about the Ebola case that was recently confirmed, we quickly started vaccinating those who came into contact with the patient. We are currently vaccinating them, but we've also continued our investigations to find more details around the case.
That case and that patient was the first time the deadly Ebola virus has broken into Goma, a city of nearly 2 million, with an international airport, close to border crossings with 2 countries. When the Ebola virus is in more rural areas, it's relatively contained. Once it gets to Goma, the stakes are much higher. Ebola could go global.
It's serious enough that the World Health Organization has declared it as a global emergency so that, not only the African countries can take the proper action and precautions, but also the global community to once again come together.
Experts are not yet alarmed, but they are concerned. And this epidemic has a particular challenge. It's happening in a war zone. Medical workers go to help patients, and some end up being killed. A global pandemic is a risk that commentators don't talk about much. Terrorism, nuclear weapons, even climate change get headlines. A pandemic is a sleeper risk, and it could be very deadly. On the way to Goma, medical workers man checkpoints to take temperatures, check symptoms. One Ebola case got through. The next step, make sure the disease doesn't spread in the big city, and make sure it doesn't go further than that. Owen Alterman, i24NEWS.
And joining me now is Dr. Amish Adalja. He is an infectious disease doctor. Thanks for joining us. This warning that we're now hearing, one that is very rarely used, the public health emergency of international concern, it's actually only been used 4 times before. So how dire is this emergency? How bad is the situation?
Well, right now we have a regional emergency with Ebola, with some spread from the DRC into Uganda. But what this declaration recognizes is that if the world's resources aren't brought to bear on this outbreak, if people don't start controlling this number of cases, it could spiral rapidly out of control, because this has been arguably the most challenging Ebola outbreak because of the conditions in that war zone that have made it really impossible to stop.
So you mentioned the war zone. The Ebola is treatable, if I understand correctly. And right now, the fact that the outbreak is in an active war zone is affecting the meds from reaching the people. Am I correct?
Well, there is no official cure for Ebola, but we do have a highly effective experimental vaccine that's being used in this outbreak, something we didn't have in the 2014 outbreak, as well as experimental antiviral therapies, a lot of knowledge about what supportive therapies work, but you actually have to find the cases, you have to isolate them, you've got to get them into places where they can actually be treated, but they haven't been able to do that. Many of these cases go without being noticed, and it becomes a catch-up game that they've been playing for over a year now with over 1,700 deaths. So we really need to get the resources in place, and people need to really recognize this for the dangerous outbreak that it is before it spreads to neighboring countries.
Now, apparently the reason the alarm was finally rung so loudly is because the virus made it to a city, to Goma. And why is that so alarming? And why would you say this was the moment where those alarms started to be sound?
Well, the emergency committee for the WHO had been convened several times and declared this not to be an emergency. And they took a lot of criticism from public health authorities. This was kind of puzzling that it took so long for them to declare this public health emergency. But when you have a disease in a city, in an urban environment, it becomes much easier to spread and much harder to track contact. So that was a danger. And Goma is a place where there are international flights to places like Ethiopia, for example. So there is a concern it could spread out of Goma. But this is the straw that kind of broke the camel's back here, because this was something that was long overdue. Even after cases were in Uganda, they did not declare an an international concern emergency.
So what precautions are being taken, and why is Ebola so difficult to contain?
Well, in the past, before 2014, Ebola outbreaks have been very easy to contain because they were happening in rural areas where you had a high compliance rate among the population, that you could go into the community, teach people how to take care of the patients there in a safe manner, how to bury bodies, and you could actually extinguish these outbreaks very, very quickly. But what we learned in 2014 is that if the population isn't receptive to those public health messages, outbreaks can spiral rapidly out of control. So what you'll see now is, for example, more epidemiologists on the ground. We know that the CDC in the United States is working to bring epidemiologists to the DRC to try and stop this outbreak. We're going to see renewed interest in increasing vaccination rates, more surveillance of people that are moving in and out of cities, across borders, for example, into Uganda. And you're going to have much more public health messaging telling people what Ebola is and how to stop it. So hopefully this will all slowly begin to turn the tide against this outbreak that's gone on for far too long.
Indeed. Dr. Amish Adalja, thank you so much. Yemen's civil war has created the world's worst ongoing humanitarian crisis, and one of the biggest challenges to delivering that aid is the country's tens of thousands of hidden landmines. i24 News correspondent Munira Al-Hamoud explains how the United States is trying to rid Yemen of these mines.
The ongoing conflict in Yemen between the Iranian-backed Houthi rebels and the Yemeni government backed by Saudi Arabia and the UAE has plagued the country with famine, cholera, and instability. As hundreds of Yemenis continue to die every day, the United States is focused on making sure that the estimated 80% of Yemenis experiencing food insecurity get relief. But one major obstacle is landmines planted all over Yemen. They not only kill civilians, but also prevent them from cultivating their fields, generating sources of income, and feeding their families. The Red Sea Mills sit on the outskirts of Hodeidah and has served as one of the UN World Food Programme primary wheat storage and processing facilities. Access was blocked by the Houthis until March.
The Red Sea Mills processed approximately 25% of all of the wheat that the World Food Programme was bringing into Yemen. This is a significant amount of food aid in a country we talked about earlier. The vast majority of the population is food insecure right now. So once the WFP was forced to withdraw all of their personnel, massive amounts of wheat were stranded at the Red Sea Mills.
Sol Black is in charge of the demining program for Yemen, Iraq, and Lebanon. His team helps the Yemen Executive Mine Action Center, or YEMAC, who has successfully removed over 300,000 landmines. Because demining is usually done several years after the end of a conflict, Yemen's security challenge is a unique obstacle to demining teams who are caught between remnants of older conflicts and the civil war. The victims of these cheap yet sophisticated Iranian-made IEDs are more often civilians than foreign forces.
Iran is also helping the Houthis to produce improvised explosive devices that are advanced. They're camouflaged in some cases to look like rocks, and some of them have what it's called a passive infrared sensor. So it's a motion detector. Unfortunately, the motion detector can't tell the difference between a military vehicle or a farmer or a child on his way to school.
Landmines have been found in schools, homes, roads, hospitals, farmlands, and wells. Yemeni officials said the country had been the site of the largest mine-laying operation since the end of the Second World War.
There were several minefields that ran through them, but then the Houthis had also intentionally booby-trapped and mined parts of the mill because they wanted to deny people access to the mill itself. These deminers, starting in March, cleared over 1,200 landmines and IEDs from the mill and the surrounding area.
After clearing all the mines, the World Food Programme is now in the final stage of treating the wheat and hope to resume operations there very soon to feed the hungry population. Munira Al-Hamoud, i24 News, Washington.
Let's take a look at some headlines from the U.S. as we cut across America. All across America, it is hot. It's so hot in New York City that the city canceled its annual triathlon, and this weekend's planned Aussie Fest music show was also canceled. In Nebraska, some people baked biscuits in their cars. In Arizona, an air conditioning repairman was found dead, believed to be from heat. Cooling centers have been set up in cities all over the country to help deal with this heat wave. In Texas, a charter bus taking kids home from a summer camp caught on fire. 43 children were on that bus. All of the kids made it off the bus before it became engulfed in flames. 6 of the campers were taken to a hospital and then released. It's not clear what caused that fire. It is believed to have started in the engine. In Philadelphia, this man is doing his very best impression of Spider-Man. It was not a publicity stunt. He was climbing down the outside of the 19-story apartment building to escape a fire. The man made it to the ground safely. And in Colorado, a group of real estate agents made a hip-hop video rapping to a spoof of the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air theme song. In it, they celebrated their success in selling luxury homes in Denver's hot housing market. It seems their success is a sore point with some in the city. The agents were criticized for being tone deaf in a city that is struggling with the housing crisis and with gentrification. The agents have since apologized for the video. All week long, we've been celebrating the 50th anniversary of the Apollo 11 moon mission, and tomorrow marks the day that astronauts Buzz Aldrin and Neil Armstrong landed on the moon. And it was a life-changing moment for one 6-year-old. Correspondent Daniel Campbell from our news partners at News 12 has the story.
Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed.
On July 20th, 1969,
Okay, Neil, we can see you coming down the ladder now.
the whole world watched
That's one small step for man,
as Neil Armstrong stepped onto the surface of the moon.
one giant leap for mankind.
Watching as well, way past his bedtime, was Franklin Square first grader Mike Massimino.
It was getting late, so I had pajamas on, and my family was around this television that we had. They all were black and white back then. And I remember them doing it in those first steps and seeing it and just being amazed. But then I remember going outside in the front yard and looking up at the moon and thinking, there's people up there.
This is Mike Massimino's childhood home in Franklin Square, and this is where a little 6-year-old boy's dreams of traveling into space were launched.
To me, it really touched me down deep in my heart, deep in my soul, to be one of those guys that I saw walking around on the moon. And that never left me. Even to this day, and it never left me. It hit me at 6 years old and never let go.
And liftoff of Space Shuttle Columbia.
Mike Massimino did finally reach the stars as an astronaut on board 2 space shuttle missions. Massimino fixed the high-powered cosmic telescope called the Hubble while gazing at his earthly home.
I felt I was looking into heaven. If I knew about that when I was a little kid, I never would have believed it.
But it seemed to be written in the stars. This photo from his childhood shows Mike dressed in an astronaut costume that was made by his mom.
And I carried my astronaut Snoopy with me. I had a toy Snoopy.
Today, Mike's childhood toy is on display at the Intrepid Museum. He says it represents dreams, passion, inspiration, and determination. Gifts he says he was given on July 20th, 1969.
For me, the 50th anniversary of Apollo is a reminder of great things that we can do. I felt that way when I was a little boy, and I still feel that way now.
Danielle Campbell, News 12, Long Island.
And that's Clearcut Plus. We'd love to hear from you. Have a great weekend and stay